Okay, let's unpack this. Take a moment right now and think about your daily life.
Yeah.
How often do you find yourself, telling someone about something that happened to you?
Oh, constantly, right?
Yeah, maybe recounting a funny moment, sharing an experience from your day, or even just explaining a situation at work?
Oh, it is constant, isn't it? We're always sharing snippets of our lives, what we
Hmm.
saw, what we did, what someone said, or listening intently as a friend explains, a tricky situation they navigated.
Yeah,
It's everywhere.
exactly. Storytelling isn't some distant formal art form just for writers or actors. It's fundamentally woven into the fabric of our everyday conversations.
Totally.
It's how we interact, how we share our world.
Absolutely. It's how we connect on a personal level,
Yeah.
how we make sense of events, how we build understanding with others. It's sharing a piece of ourselves, really, our perspective.
And that fundamental role, that deep connection piece, is precisely why this deep dive is so incredibly relevant to you, especially if you're working on communicating effectively in English.
Right. Because every single time you share an experience from your past, describe an event you witnessed, or recount something that happened to you personally, you are, at its heart, telling a story.
You really are.
And mastering this skill is essential for effective, natural, real-world English communication. It's not just about listing facts, it's about sharing your experiences in a way that others can easily follow, understand, and, well, connect with.
But, and this is really clear from the stack of source material we've been diving into for this conversation, telling stories smoothly and clearly in English presents some specific hurdles for learners.
Mm-hmm.
The sources really highlight that one major challenge is when people's ideas feel disjointed, kind of jumping around without a clear flow.
That lack of narrative
Yeah.
flow,
Yeah.
yeah. The sources describe it like trying to build something, maybe a bridge,
Yeah.
but the pieces are given to you in a completely random order. It becomes incredibly difficult for the listener to see how one part logically connects to the next, or to grasp the overall picture of what happened. They're constantly trying to mentally reassemble the pieces.
It's like walking a path where chunks are missing,
Yeah.
and you have to guess where to step next. It sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting for the listener. And the sources emphasize that another big challenge they see is linked to managing the timeline of events.
Ah, yes. Getting tangled up with verb tenses.
Exactly. Choosing and using the correct past tenses consistently to show the sequence of events. The sources point to this as a really common difficulty that trips people up.
Totally. If the tenses are inconsistent, it can feel like things happened in a completely different order than they actually did. Or you can leave the listener wondering, wait, is this still happening? Did this finish before the next thing started?
Big confusion.
It's a major source of confusion for someone trying to keep up with the actual sequence and completion of your experience.
And then there's the detail issue. The sources note that sometimes, even with the best intentions, maybe wanting to be very thorough or precise storytellers can overwhelm the listener with just too many small, perhaps irrelevant details. The listener just gets buried in the information.
It's the opposite problem of not enough information, but it's just as disruptive to understanding, isn't it?
Definitely.
The sources use a great analogy for this. It's like trying to find one specific person you're telling a story about in a crowded photo.
Oh, I remember this one.
But you spend all your time describing every single person and object in the background. Your listener can't find the main subject anymore because their brain is trying to process all that extra, non-essential visual data.
That analogy from the sources really hits home, doesn't it? It vividly shows how extra details, even accurate ones, can completely obscure the main point.
Yeah, they become clutter.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to take these specific challenges, the disjointed flow, the timeline confusion from tenses, the detail overload, and tackle them head on, using the practical insights drawn directly from our source material.
Exactly. We're going to unpack what these resources suggest is the pathway forward. We'll lay out a clear, actionable roadmap for telling your stories in English more effectively. This means showing you how to build a simple, solid structure, introducing you to some specific natural-sounding phrases that really help guide your listener along.
Those verbal signposts.
Yeah, those verbal signposts, giving you strategies for adding just the right amount of color, details, and emotions without overwhelming anyone.
And fascinatingly, we'll even explore a bit of the cultural context of storytelling in English, which the sources suggest is crucial for understanding why native speakers tell stories the way they do sometimes.
Okay, so by the time we finish our conversation today, the absolute goal is for you, the listener, to feel significantly more equipped, much more confident, and genuinely empowered the next time you want to share a personal experience in English.
Practical tools.
You'll have practical tools straight from the source material to make your stories clearer, more engaging, and ultimately more enjoyable for people to listen to.
That sounds like a deep dive absolutely worth taking. Let's jump right in and unpack this essential skill.
Let's do it.
And according to our source material, the absolute foundation, the bedrock upon which everything else rests, is structure.
You know, what immediately stands out from these sources is how clearly they identify the root cause of so much of that confusion you see when English learners try to tell stories.
Yeah.
It's precisely that lack of structure, isn't it?
It really is.
When you jump from one part of an event to a completely different part, or introduce key people or places late in the narrative, or just start telling the story in the middle of the action without any context,
All right, no setup.
it forces the listener's brain to constantly work hard, trying to figure out what's going on and where they are in the story.
The sources use a really evocative phrase for this. It's exhausting for the listener.
Exhausting, yeah.
Their mental energy is spent trying to build the basic framework of your story instead of just being able to relax and follow the narrative itself.
I can picture that.
It really is like trying to assemble a piece of flat pack furniture without any instructions.
Oh, that's a good one.
You have all the pieces there, the events, the details, the characters, but you have absolutely no clue how they fit together or in what order to build the complete item.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You've got the components, but no blueprint.
Or, as the sources also illustrate, it's like trying to follow a map where significant pieces are missing or jumbled up.
Mm-hmm.
You might see the starting point, maybe you know the final destination, but the path between them is just a confusing mess. There's no clear, logical progression from one moment to the next.
Exactly. It's disorienting for the listener, but the fantastic news, the really powerful insight the sources offer is that the solution to this foundational structural problem is actually wonderfully simple and incredibly effective.
Okay.
They boil it down to this. At its core, a good story, any good story, needs just 3 fundamental parts.
Just 3. Okay, tell me more. I like simple. The beginning, the middle, and the end. That's it. The sources stress this as the universal framework. It applies to everything from a quick, casual anecdote over coffee to a complex novel or film.
And when you think about it, that structure makes intuitive sense, doesn't it?
Totally.
It mirrors how we naturally experience and process events in the real world. Something starts, then something happens, and then it concludes.
Precisely. It provides a predictable, comfortable mental path for both the storyteller who is organizing their thoughts and the listener who is trying to follow along. Our brains are really wired to understand narratives that follow this kind of linear progression.
And the sources really emphasize starting with simplicity when focusing on structure. This isn't about immediately trying to implement complex literary techniques or narrative devices.
Not at all. That's way down the line, if even necessary for casual conversation. The most impactful initial step, the one that gives you the biggest return for your effort, according to these materials, is internalizing this core 3-part model. Use it as your mental guide, your organizing principle, before you even open your mouth to tell a story.
Use it to figure out, okay, what belongs in the start, what's the main bit, and how does it finish?
Yeah.
Like sorting things into 3 boxes first.
Exactly. And focusing on this simple 3-part structure is crucial for a few specific, really insightful reasons that the material highlights. Firstly, for you, the storyteller, it acts as a powerful tool to manage the information in your head. When you know your goal is simply to cover what happened first, the beginning, then describe the main event or change the middle and finally explain the outcome, the end, it creates a filter.
Ah, filter. How so?
Yeah, it helps you filter out tangents, those small, irrelevant details or side points that aren't essential to moving the main story forward logically. It keeps you focused on the narrative path.
Yeah, it keeps you on track.
It prevents you from getting lost in your own memories or a chaotic rush of thoughts while you're trying to speak, which the sources note is a really common problem when you lack structure. You just start wandering off.
So it's like having a clear path with guardrails that helps you stay on track with the most important points of the story. Avoids those conversational cul-de-sacs.
Precisely. It gives you a mental roadmap. And for the listener, this simple 3-part structure is, as the sources put it, a clear map for them too.
Oh, okay.
From the very first sentence, if you set the scene effectively, they instinctively know, okay, they're telling me who, where, and when. This is the setup. Then when you move to the middle, they think, here comes the main thing that happened. And they anticipate the ending to provide closure.
That must make it so much less effort for the listener. Their brain isn't constantly trying to piece together the timeline or the core sequence.
Significantly less effort? The sources use the term cognitive load. A clear structure dramatically reduces the listener's cognitive load. They aren't constantly trying to figure out where are we in this story, what's the point, what happened when.
They can just relax.
They can just relax and listen because the structure is clearly signposted and supporting their understanding.
Which, as the sources point out, directly combats that feeling of confusion or being overwhelmed that we talked about earlier. They could just follow the narrative unfolding in a predictable, clear, and comfortable way.
So that's the first and perhaps most powerful takeaway from this material. The absolute power of the simple three-part structure, beginning, middle, end. It's the essential skeleton, the foundational blueprint for clarity and storytelling. Get this right, and you solve a huge chunk of the potential confusion problem.
It really is the essential foundation. Okay, so now we understand this overall framework. Let's delve deeper into each of these parts, building the story piece by piece, just as the source material guides us.
Right. Let's start at the very beginning, as they say.
The beginning. The sources consistently label this part as setting the scene. And they are very clear about its main job, its primary purpose, to quickly orient your listener.
Yeah, get them grounded.
You absolutely must give them the essential context right up front.
Exactly. Think about it. Before you launch into the most exciting or important part of your story, the actual event, you need to give the listener the critical background information. Who's involved? Where were you? When did this happen? Otherwise, they're spending the first part of your story playing catch-up, trying to figure out these basic facts while you're already halfway through describing the action.
That's so true. Their brain is still trying to load the scene while you're already running the movie. It's like starting a movie 10 minutes in.
Precisely. It's like providing the vital coordinates on a map before you describe the journey itself. The sources list 4 key questions the beginning of your story should ideally answer to achieve this quick orientation. Who is involved? Where is it happening? When did it take place? And what was generally happening at the start?
Those 4 questions, who, where, when, what are like the absolute minimum information needed for the listener to feel grounded? And the sources give a fantastic, wonderfully concise example sentence that manages to hit all 4 of these points in just one natural-sounding sentence.
It really is efficient.
It's a masterclass in efficient scene setting.
It really is. And that sentence, as given in the sources, is, last weekend I was at a coffee shop with my friend, and we were just chatting about work.
Okay, let's quickly break that down using the sources analysis because it perfectly illustrates how much crucial information can be packed into a few words when done right.
Definitely. Last weekend, that clearly answers when the story happened. It gives the listener a specific time frame immediately.
Simple and clear. Tick. I and my friend, that tells us who is involved. We know the main characters.
Got it. Tick. At a coffee shop, that answers where the story is taking place. It provides the physical setting, allows the listener to visualize a location.
Tick. And we were just chatting about work that answers what was happening at the very start. It establishes the initial state of things, the general calm situation before the main event occurs.
4 ticks. See how efficient that is? Just one sentence, and the listener is completely grounded. They know who, where, when, and what you are generally doing at the outset. They have the starting point, the coordinates for your story's journey.
It's remarkable how much context that provides with so few words. And why is getting this information out first so important? What happens if you skip this beginning phase or delay giving this context?
Because, as the sources strongly emphasize, it prevents that immediate confusion we discussed earlier. If you just jumped in with something like, someone gave me a free dessert, what happens in the listener's mind?
Questions.
It instantly starts racing. Wait, where were you? Who were you with? When did this happen? Why did they give you a free dessert?
Right. All those basic questions are competing for their attention, distracting them from the actual story you're about to tell. They're busy filling in blanks instead of listening.
Exactly. Answering those crucial basic questions up front means the listener isn't distracted trying to piece together the fundamental context while you're in the middle of the interesting part. Their foundation is set. They are ready to receive the actual narrative because the scene has been clearly painted.
It sets their expectations, allows them to visualize the setting and characters from the get-go. It provides the necessary mental image before the action even begins. It's like preloading the background before the main actors step onto the stage.
Well put.
Let's think of a couple more examples from the sources that use this same principle of setting the scene efficiently. How would a work story start? following this pattern.
A work story following this pattern might begin. Yesterday morning, I was sitting at my desk, working on that big report. Again, hitting all 4 points efficiently.
Okay, let's check. When?
Yesterday morning.
Who?
Where?
Where? What initial activity?
Working on that big report. All the essential context delivered efficiently before the main work drama unfolds, whatever that might be.
Perfect. Or a travel story start. How about that?
A travel anecdote could start. A few years ago, I was backpacking through Italy with my sister, and we were looking for our hostel again.
Okay.
A few years ago,
Right.
I and my sister, backpacking through Italy.
What initial activity?
Looking for our hostel again. Same principles apply. The listener knows who, where, and when they are in the narrative before you even mention finding the hostel or getting lost or whatever the main event is. They're oriented.
Okay, so the beginning is all about setting the scene clearly and efficiently by answering those 4 key questions. Who, where, when, and what was happening initially. Got it. Scene set. We have the foundation. Now we need to move into the main event, the core of the story.
Right, the middle. The source material describes this as the part where something interesting happens.
The main event, the turning point, the reason you're telling the story.
Precisely. It's the core event, the incident, the change that makes this particular story worth telling in the first place. It's often where a problem arises, something unexpected occurs, or the main action unfolds that disrupts the initial situation you described in the beginning.
The sources call it the exciting part, but they define exciting pretty broadly. Right? It doesn't have to be like an action movie sequence.
No, not at all. It means anything noteworthy that changes the initial state. It could be funny, weird, surprising, challenging, awkward, anything that shifts the narrative away from the calm setup you established.
Gotcha.
Picking up our coffee shop example from the sources, after setting the scene, last weekend I was at a coffee shop with my friend just chatting about work, the middle is where the disruption, the main event happens. Suddenly, the waiter walked over and gave us a free dessert. We were so surprised because we hadn't ordered it.
Boom. There's the disruption. Chatting about work is interrupted by the unexpected arrival of this unsolicited dessert. That's the event the story is truly about, the thing that broke the routine.
And that word suddenly is a great signal, isn't it? It flags to the listener that the main event is starting, that things are changing abruptly from the initial situation.
Yeah, it perks up your ears.
It's a fantastic verbal signpost, as the sources would put it, indicating a shift in the narrative's energy and focus. It makes the unexpected event feel just as sudden and impactful to the listener as it felt to you.
And the immediate reaction, we were so surprised because we hadn't ordered it, doesn't just add emotion, which is good. It highlights why this moment is noteworthy. It wasn't something expected or routine. It justifies telling the story.
So the middle isn't just any random action that occurs. It's the specific action or event that matters for this particular story. It's the central point, the core conflict, the surprising incident. It's essentially the plot of your narrative, the sequence of key events that move the story forward from the setup.
Right. Without the middle, you'd have a beginning and maybe an end, but no actual story connecting them. The listener would know where you were and how it finished, but they'd be missing the entire central experience. The reason you're even telling the story, they'd be like, so?
Exactly. It's the engine that drives the narrative forward. It's the meat on the bones of that structural skeleton. It's the answer to, so what happened? It's why you decided to share this experience in the first place.
Okay, makes sense.
And once that main event or sequence of events in the middle has concluded, the story needs to, wrap up. It needs to find its conclusion.
Which brings us to the end. The sources clearly state that the purpose of the end is to provide closure, resolution. It tells the listener what happened as a result of that middle event, how the situation finished, and ideally brings it all to a clear, satisfying conclusion.
So finishing our coffee shop story, the ending provided in the source material ties up the loose ends from the unexpected dessert. It turned out that the dessert was for another table, but the waiter told us to keep it. It was such a nice surprise.
See how that clearly resolves the situation introduced in the middle. It answers the question raised by the surprise dessert.
Yes. It turned out that the dessert was for another table. Explains why the unexpected thing happened. It answers the implicit question in the listener's mind about the dessert's arrival. The mystery is solved.
The confusion is cleared up. You weren't just randomly chosen for free dessert.
Exactly. And then, but the waiter told us to keep it, details the final outcome. A clear resolution to the situation. You got to enjoy the free dessert anyway.
Nice bonus.
Right. And finally, "It was such a nice surprise," summarizes the overall feeling or takeaway from the experience, reinforcing the positive end to the anecdote. It gives that emotional summary.
And why is having a clear ending so important? The sources say without one, the story just feels unfinished, like it just stops.
Totally. It just kind of trails off awkwardly. It leaves the listener hanging, thinking, is that it? Was something else supposed to happen? What was the final result?
Yeah.
It's unsatisfying.
Yeah, like a movie that just cuts to black mid-scene. A good ending provides that vital sense of completion.
It gives the listener the final takeaway, leaves a clear impression, makes the entire narrative feel whole and, as you said, satisfying, like the final chord of a piece of music, or putting the lid back on the box.
Okay.
Precisely. So, to quickly recap that core structure based on the source guidance, start by setting the scene clearly, that's the beginning. Describe the main action or interesting event that disrupts the scene, that's the middle. And finish with a clear resolution or outcome, that's the end. That simple three-part framework is incredibly powerful for clarity and comprehension.
It really is the blueprint. Get that right, and you're halfway there.
Wow.
Now, we talked about how structure provides the essential skeleton, but to make stories lively, engaging, and sound like natural English conversation, you need more than just a skeleton.
Definitely not.
You need to add flavor, dynamics, the kinds of phrases native speakers use without thinking to guide the listener.
Right. These are the natural expressions, what the sources call verbal signposts. They aren't strictly necessary for the literal meaning of the words, but they are crucial for making the story flow smoothly, keeping the listener's attention, and sounding conversational rather than like you're just listing facts.
Like adding directional arrows to your map. Once you have the structure in mind, incorporating these phrases helps the listener navigate your story more easily and makes it feel more alive.
Exactly. They make your English sound much more natural and dynamic. Okay, so how do you grab your listener's attention right from the start, signal that a story is coming, and pique their interest? The source material gives some great examples of opening phrases for this.
Okay, what do we got?
These are like explicit invitations to listen, creating intrigue immediately, or setting a specific tone.
Hook 'em early.
Hook 'em early. They list examples like, "You won't believe what happened to me."
Oh, I love that one. It creates instant curiosity.
Yeah.
Your listener immediately thinks, okay, tell me, what was it? It's an immediate hook. You can't not listen after that.
Right. It sparks that instant what reaction, or a slightly more interactive approach. Guess what?
That pulls the listener in directly. They feel like they're part of the setup, like you're sharing a secret.
Exactly. Or if the story is specifically meant to be humorous, something like, "So the funniest thing happened the other day."
That immediately tells your listener the tone, right? They know to prepare to be amused before you even get into the details. It manages expectations.
Precisely. Using phrases like these makes your introduction feel spontaneous, engaging, like you're sharing something genuinely interesting with a friend. They signal, okay, everyone, lean in. This isn't just a routine report. This is a story. They prepare the listener's brain to engage differently, to be entertained.
Okay, so you've hooked them with a phrase like that. You set the scene with your pivotal beginning. Now you're moving into the middle, describing the main event, the action, the disruption. How do you make that part feel dynamic? How do you signal a turning point, highlight something unexpected, or build a little suspense to keep them invested?
This is where another set of phrases comes in, specifically highlighted by the sources for use in the middle section. These are phrases designed for adding drama, signaling a key action, or marking a moment where things change significantly or something surprising happens. They keep the energy up.
Give us some examples from the material. What should we be listening for?
Well, things like all of a sudden or out of nowhere. These have a similar feel and are great for introducing unexpected events.
Okay, they feel very abrupt.
They do. They inject that feeling of suddenness into the story, mirroring the shock or surprise you might have felt when the event occurred. They draw immediate attention to that specific moment of change. Makes the listener feel it too.
Got it. What else?
Also, the seemingly simple "and then," which is crucial for showing sequence, especially if multiple things happen in the middle.
And then seems so basic, but I guess incredibly important for just clearly linking one action to the next within the middle part, especially if there's a sequence of things happening. It avoids confusion about order.
Incredibly useful, yes. It links actions together clearly, keeps the sequence crystal clear, and prevents confusion about the order of events within the middle section itself. It's a workhorse phrase for narrative flow. Don't underestimate it.
Okay. Workhorse phrase. Got it. Anything else for the middle?
And to my surprise, That's quite powerful because it explicitly states your immediate emotional reaction to what happened.
Right, it flags your feeling.
It helps the listener connect directly with your internal experience in that moment, building empathy. You're telling them not just what happened, but how it felt to you.
So using these phrases strategically in the middle all of a sudden, and then, to my surprise, really breaks up any potential monotony, highlights the key moments, signals the turning points. It's like you're putting an exclamation mark on the important action, saying, listen up, this part matters.
Exactly. It adds dynamism and helps the listener understand why this particular action or event in the middle is significant to the story you're telling. Okay, so the core events have unfolded. The middle has done its job. Now you need to bring the story to a smooth, effective close. You hook them at the start, guided them through the middle. Now you need a good landing, a clear finish.
Right. You need a phrase that signals the end clearly, maybe summarizes the feeling or the outcome, stops it from just stopping abruptly, leaving the listener confused if you're finished or if there's more coming. That awkward silence.
Avoid the awkward silence. And the source material provides specific phrases for this final act too. Things like, in the end.
Very clear. That signals, okay, they're wrapping up now.
Or, and that's how it all happened. Which feels very conclusive, like the story is complete, puts a neat bow on it.
Yeah. Or maybe a phrase that summarizes the overall feeling or the main point of the experience. Something like, it was such a crazy experience.
Right. And you could swap crazy for funny, surprising, frustrating, memorable, whatever accurately captures the tone and outcome of your specific story. It gives that final emotional punchline or summary.
Using these ending phrases, as the sources advise, prevents the story from simply fizzling out or ending with that awkward silence where the listener isn't sure if you're done. It provides a clear, satisfying conclusion. They know the story is finished, they understand the result or the final feeling you want to convey, bringing everything to a neat and tidy close.
Okay. So incorporating these specific types of expressions for starting strong, building dynamics or suspense in the middle, and signaling a clear end really adds layers of naturalness and engagement to your story. They are powerful tools that guide the listener smoothly through your narrative and make the whole thing much more dynamic and enjoyable to listen to.
They definitely take the solid structure and make it sound like real flowing conversation. Now, structure gives us clarity. Connecting phrases ensure flow. But what makes a story truly stick with someone, what makes it memorable, relatable, is when it feels vivid, real, when the listener can really see and feel what you experienced.
Ah, yes. Adding color, sensory details, and conveying your emotions. This is where the story moves beyond just a sequence of facts and actually comes alive for the listener. This is the artistry, maybe.
Could be. This is about painting a picture with your words, helping the listener visualize the scene, the people, the objects, and just as importantly, helping them understand and perhaps even feel the emotions you experienced, making it immersive.
Exactly. This is about painting a picture with your words, helping the listener visualize the scene, the people, the objects, and just as importantly, helping them understand and perhaps even feel the emotions you experienced.
But here, the source material gives us a really important warning. They highlight a crucial point of balance that is often overlooked and can easily go wrong. This seems key.
This is critical. The sources strongly advocate for adding specific details, descriptive language, sensory information, and for conveying your emotions. They see immense value in this for making a story come alive, helping the listener visualize the scene and connect with how you felt. They emphasize that this richness is what makes a story engaging.
But, and this is the really big caution the sources explicitly stress, they say, be careful, not too many details.
Why is that balance so important? It seems counterintuitive. You'd think more details would just add more clarity, more information for the listener. More is better, right?
It does seem logical, right? You want to give them the full picture. But the sources explain that adding too many details can actually backfire significantly. It can make your story boring, tedious, and ultimately just overwhelming or confusing for the listener.
How does that happen? What's the impact on the listener's ability to follow if you give them too much?
Well, going back to an analogy the sources use, imagine you're telling a story about meeting someone interesting. If you describe every button on their shirt, the precise color of their shoelaces, the pattern on the wallpaper in the room, the number of chairs, unless those minute details are directly relevant to the core point of your story,
They just become clutter, unnecessary noise that distracts from the main thread, like static.
Exactly, they become clutter. The listener's brain has to process all this extra non-essential information, and it actively prevents them from focusing on the main narrative thread. It's like trying to find one specific important star in the night sky while someone is pointing out and meticulously describing every single grain of sand on the beach.
Wow, yeah.
You completely lose sight of the significant point because you're drowning in irrelevant data.
That makes so much sense. So the key is not about listing all the details you remember. It's about selecting the right ones, the impactful ones that genuinely serve the story and help the listener understand, visualize, or connect rather than hindering them. Being a good editor of your own story.
Precisely. Be selective, be purposeful. And the source material gives a great contrast example to illustrate this difference between a basic description and one that adds just the right amount of impactful detail.
Okay, what's the comparison they use?
They compare the simple statement, I saw a dog. Okay, factual but boring.
Very flat.
Compared to a description that's richer and more engaging, I saw the cutest golden retriever running around the park.
Okay, let's break down, based on the source's analysis, why that second sentence is so much more effective for storytelling. What makes it work?
Well, first, cutest. That's not just a factual observation about the dog's appearance. It's subjective, it conveys your emotional reaction to the dog, it adds your personality, your perspective to the narrative.
And it instantly connects the listener to how you felt about the dog. It builds a bit of a relationship with the story right there. You feel the speaker's delight.
Right. Then golden retriever. That's specific. It's not just any dog, it's a particular breed. This gives the listener a clear visual image. Most people have a good idea of what a golden retriever looks like, so they can picture it much more vividly than just dog.
Much more concrete. Fills in the picture.
Absolutely. And finally, running around the park. That adds context, action, and setting. It puts the dog into a scene, doing something dynamic. Rather than just being a static object you observed, you see movement.
So those few additions, cutest, golden retriever, running around the park, they transform a basic statement into something that, as the sources say, makes the story come alive. They paint a picture.
Exactly. They are impactful because they add visual richness, emotional context, and specific action without adding unnecessary clutter. They help the listener visualize the dog vividly and connect with your experience without getting bogged down in irrelevant facts like what color its collar was or how many blades of grass were in the park. It's about choosing details that serve the story, that enhance the mental image and emotional connection, not describing every tiny observation you made.
So select details that add meaning or vividness and skip the rest. And it's not just physical details, right? Conveying your feelings is just as important, perhaps even more so, for building that connection and making the story relatable.
Crucial. How you felt during the experience is a huge part of the story itself. The sources give another excellent contrast here, comparing a simple statement of emotion. I was surprised.
Okay, grammatically correct, but maybe a bit flat, doesn't convey much intensity, like how surprised? Mildly, very.
Exactly. Compared to a more expressive way of conveying surprise, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it.
Okay, shocked immediately feels stronger than just surprised, doesn't it? It suggests a much higher level of astonishment or disbelief, much more intense.
It indicates a greater intensity of the emotional reaction. And adding I couldn't believe it amplifies that feeling even further. It shows the depth of your reaction. It wasn't just a mild surprise. It was profound astonishment that left you momentarily reeling. You get a much better sense of the speaker's internal state.
So the sources emphasize that using these stronger, more precise words for emotions helps the listener feel what you felt. It helps them understand the intensity of your experience and connect with it on a deeper level. It bridges that gap between storyteller and listener.
Absolutely. When you choose words that accurately reflect the intensity of your emotions, whether it's immense joy versus slight happiness, furious anger versus mild annoyance, crippling fear versus slight nervousness, complete excitement versus mild interest, you invite empathy from the listener. They can better relate to and understand your experience.
Yeah.
Using more precise, potentially stronger emotion words makes the story resonate more emotionally and creates a deeper connection.
So the key takeaway here is, be expressive with both details and emotions. Use descriptive language to help the listener visualize, and use accurate, potentially stronger emotion words to help them feel what you felt. Bring it to life.
But, and this is the part to constantly remember, always keep that balance in mind, as the sources put it. Don't overdo it with too many irrelevant details or overly dramatic language for a minor point. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill, emotionally speaking.
Right. The goal, derived from the source's focus on effective communication, is vivid, engaging storytelling that enhances connection and understanding, not overwhelming the listener with every tiny observation or fleeting feeling you had. Select the details and the emotion words that have the most impact and move the story or connection forward. Be purposeful.
Be expressive, be selective, be balanced. That's the art of adding color, effectively. Okay, so we've covered the essential blueprint, that a simple three-part structure. We've looked at the phrases that add flow, dynamism, and act as verbal signposts. We've explored the art of adding color and feeling with balanced details and emotions. But there's still that piece we identified in the introduction. The timeline confusion often caused by verb tenses. How do the sources guide us on handling tenses within this narrative framework? That seems really important for clarity.
That's a critical point, because even with perfect structure, if your tenses are confusing, the listener will absolutely lose track of the sequence of events. Now, while the sources we used weren't, grammar textbooks.
Right? They weren't focused just on grammar rules.
No, but their emphasis on clarity and chronological flow strongly implies a need for consistent tense usage to support that structure. They provide examples within their narrative illustrations that demonstrate effective tense use, even if they don't explicitly list the grammar rules themselves. We can learn from the examples.
Okay, so we can infer the principles for tense usage from their examples and focus on clarity. Use the structure to guide the tense choices.
Precisely. If the goal is to make the timeline clear, then the tense usage must reinforce that clarity. Let's look at how the tenses work within the beginning, middle, and end framework, drawing on the patterns seen in the source's examples.
Okay, so in the beginning, when you're setting the scene and describing what was generally happening, what tense pattern do the examples show? Like, we were chatting.
Exactly. In the examples like we were just chatting about work or we were looking for our hostel again, the sources often use the past continuous tense, Wasser plus Kunsch verb. This tense is perfect for describing an ongoing background action or situation that was happening at the start of your story when the main event interrupted it.
Ah, okay. So past continuous sets the static scene, the background activity that was in progress. I was sitting at my desk, the sun was shining, they were waiting for the bus, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It tells the listener, this was the situation, the activity in progress when the story began. It creates that initial setting, establishes the baseline.
And then what happens in the middle when the main event occurs? What tense do the sources use for those key actions, the things that actually happen sequentially?
For the main actions, the specific events that happen one after another, the turning points, the disruptions, the examples consistently use the past simple tense. Suddenly the waiter walked over and gave us free dessert. I saw a golden retriever. I felt a sudden pain.
Okay, past simple for the sequence of main events. He opened the door, she told me the news, they decided to leave. Completed actions in the past, one after the other.
Yes, the past simple is the workhorse tense for narrative in English. It tells the listener about completed actions that happened at a specific point in the past, and crucially, it signals the sequence of those main events. If you use past simple consistently for the key actions in your middle section, the listener understands that one action followed the other in that specific order. It builds the chain of events.
Got it. Past continuous for the background setup in the beginning. Past simple for the sequence of main actions in the middle. What about the end? The resolution, does it stick with past simple?
The end typically continues using the past simple tense because you are describing the final sequence of completed actions that brought the story to a close. It turned out, the waiter told us, it was such a nice surprise. These are all past simple verbs describing the final state or actions of the story, how things concluded.
Okay, so past simple for the resolution too. It feels like the main narrative spine, the sequence of key events from the disruption through to the conclusion, is built using the past simple.
Precisely. Past simple is the main tense for moving the story forward through its sequence of core events, both in the middle and the end. Past continuous is primarily used in the beginning to set the scene with background activity that was interrupted or ongoing. Now, there's also the past perfect tense, had plus past participle, which is sometimes useful in storytelling, though perhaps less common in simple anecdotes unless you need to refer back.
When would you use past perfect based on the goal of clarity the sources emphasize? When does it help the listener?
You use the past perfect to talk about something that happened before the main events of your story's timeline. So before the past simple sequence started.
Ah, like giving earlier background.
Exactly. For example, if you're telling a story about getting lost, main story using past simple, but you want to explain why you got lost, you might say, I realized I was lost because I had forgotten my map at the hotel.
Ah, okay. Had forgotten. Happened before the realized I was lost, or the getting lost started. It clarifies the cause which occurred earlier.
Exactly. It signals an action that was completed at some point before the main narrative you're telling in past simple began. The source's focus on clear timeline implies you need a way to signal these earlier events if they are relevant context, and past perfect does that job clearly. It avoids confusion about when that prior action happened relative to your main story.
So to tie it all together, based on the source's emphasis on clarity and flow, for a clear timeline,
Use past continuous for the background action in progress in the beginning.
then use past simple for the sequence of main events in the middle and the resolution in the end.
And use past perfect if you need to mention something important that happened before your story's main timeline began.
Right. Focusing on these three tenses and using them consistently to signal sequence, past simple, and background versus foreground action, past continuous versus past simple, is key to overcoming that timeline confusion the sources mentioned.
Absolutely. It supports the structure and makes the narrative flow much more logically for the listener. The tenses work with the BME structure to create clarity.
That's incredibly helpful. It provides that concrete grammatical tool to match the structural framework we've been discussing. So structure gives clarity, phrases add flow and engagement, balanced details and emotions add vividness and connection, and consistent tense usage ensures the timeline is clear. That's a pretty solid toolkit.
Exactly. These elements work together synergistically. Now, we also discussed the cultural dimension. The source material brings up fascinating insights about how storytelling operates within English-speaking contexts, which is vital for understanding not just how to tell a story effectively in English, but also why some of these techniques are so valued.
What did the sources highlight about this cultural side? This seems really interesting.
They really emphasize that in many English-speaking cultures, specifically mentioning American and British examples, storytelling is a really significant and expected part of daily social interaction. People share anecdotes all the time, in casual conversations with friends, colleagues, even acquaintances.
It's not just for special occasions.
No, it's highlighted as a core way people connect with each other on a personal level. Sharing experiences through stories is fundamental to building rapport and relationships.
So it's not just for formal occasions. It's happening constantly in everyday chat. It's like social glue.
Absolutely. And the sources point out something crucial about the purpose of a lot of this casual, everyday storytelling. It's often not solely about conveying information efficiently or reporting facts in the most concise way possible. There's another layer.
This is the really interesting nuance, isn't it? What's the other layer?
It is because, significantly, maybe even primarily, the goal is often about entertainment.
Entertainment. Okay, that shifts the focus considerably from just pure accuracy or efficiency, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. While the core facts matter, you shouldn't make things up entirely. That's deception. The main goal in many casual situations is to engage the listener, to be interesting, perhaps to make them laugh, to share an experience vividly enough to hold their attention and make them enjoy the interaction.
And this focus on entertainment explains some common practices that might otherwise seem strange or even slightly dishonest to someone from a different cultural background.
Like the point the sources make about people sometimes choosing to exaggerate a little bit for effect, particularly mentioning this in the context of American humor and funny stories. A little embellishment.
Yes, they were quite clear on that. The motivation isn't to deceive, but specifically to make the story sound funnier or more dramatic and therefore more entertaining for the audience, to get a better reaction.
Right. Because the cultural value placed on the entertainment factor of a story in these contexts is so high, a small, harmless embellishment, something that exaggerates a reaction slightly, I nearly died laughing, or makes a detail a bit more dramatic, it was the biggest spider I've ever seen, to boost the comedic effect is often just accepted by native speakers.
It's understood as part of the genre.
Sort of. It's seen as part of the informal performance of telling a good, engaging story, making it better for the audience rather than fundamentally changing the truth of the event. It's about crafting the narrative for maximum impact and enjoyment.
So you're not changing the core event.
No.
You did get the dessert, you did see the dog, but you might ramp up your described reaction to the dessert to make it funnier. Or describe the dog as the cutest or the craziest to emphasize its impact on you and make it more memorable. Crafting the narrative specifically for enjoyment.
Exactly. It's about shaping the story to resonate with the listener on an emotional or humorous level within accepted bounds. Another huge way stories are made engaging in these cultures, and this is strongly highlighted by the sources, is through nonverbal communication.
Using your body. Your voice, not just the words themselves. The whole package.
Crucial. The sources mention that people frequently use gestures, facial expressions, and voice changes in casual conversation when telling stories. It's not an optional extra. It's an integral part of the communication. People expect it.
And they gave great examples like whispering to build suspense. I can see how that works.
Which physically makes your listener lean in, creates a feeling of secrecy or drama, draws them deeper into the moment. It changes the dynamic instantly.
Or raising your voice for excitement, energy, or surprise. Matching your voice to the emotion.
That helps the listener feel the intensity you felt in that moment. You're conveying the emotion and energy not just through the words chosen, I was excited, but through the delivery of those words, speaking faster, louder, higher pitch.
These nonverbals add such a powerful extra layer, don't they? A well-timed pause before a punchline for comedic effect. A hand gesture to indicate size or movement. The fish was this big. A facial expression to show shock or amusement. They all contribute significantly to making the story more engaging, more vivid, and, as the sources put it, more fun.
They absolutely convey energy and emotion on a physical level, making the story a more multisensory experience for the listener. It's an integral part of the storytelling performance in these contexts, especially in casual conversation. It makes the whole interaction more dynamic.
So understanding this cultural dimension, that casual storytelling is common practice, often aims for entertainment, might involve humor and slight exaggeration for effect, and heavily relies on nonverbals, gives you crucial insight into why native speakers tell stories the way they do, and helps explain why the structural and linguistic techniques we've discussed are so effective in English communication. It's about meeting those cultural expectations.
Absolutely. It helps you understand the unspoken rules of this kind of social interaction and why the listener expects more than just a factual report. They often expect connection and engagement.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The essential blueprint of a three-part structure for clarity, the phrases that add flow and dynamism, the critical skill of adding balanced details and emotions for vividness and connection, consistent tense usage for a clear timeline, and the cultural context emphasizing entertainment and nonverbals. Now, what does all this mean for you, our listener, in terms of actually doing it, putting it into practice? How do you take all this theory and start using it effectively? Because knowing isn't the same as doing.
Right, because theory is one thing, but active application is where the skill is built. The source material is great because it offers a very practical path forward for practice. It lays out a clear challenge broken down into simple, actionable steps, helping you move from just understanding these ideas to actively using them and building confidence. It makes it less daunting.
Okay, what's the very first step the sources suggest for putting this into practice? Where do you begin?
Step one, they say, is simply to choose a story. Think of a short personal experience, something that happened to you. To make it easier when you're starting out, pick something that naturally has that clear beginning, middle, and end structure.
Keep it simple at first.
Keep it simple. The sources suggest picking something funny, surprising, or interesting, as these types of events often have a distinct main event that makes the middle clear and gives you a natural reason to tell it.
Got it. Start small with a simple story that already has a clear flow. What's step two?
Step two is to apply the structure. Once you have your story in mind, plan it out. You can do this mentally, or for extra help, jot down quick bullet points for each part, just rough notes.
Like a mini outline.
Exactly. Beginning, who, where, when, what was happening initially. Middle, what was the main interesting thing that happened, the disruption. End, how did it conclude? What was the outcome or the final feeling? Then practice telling that story, focusing explicitly on following the structure. Just focus on hitting those key points in order, moving logically from B to M to E. Don't worry about perfection yet, just the flow.
Okay. Choose a story, structure it out with BME, and then practice telling it, concentrating only on hitting those three sections in order. And step three, building on that.
Step three is to consciously try to weave in some of those storytelling expressions that we talked about, the verbal signposts. Don't feel like you need to use every single phrase in one go. That would sound unnatural and forced.
Right, don't overdo it.
But pick maybe one or two specific phrases you want to try. For instance, consciously include an opening phrase like, guess what? A middle phrase like, all of a sudden when the main event happens, and an ending phrase like, and that's how it all happened, or a phrase summarizing the feeling like it was so embarrassing. Try to include at least two or three deliberately as you tell the story. Make it a conscious choice.
So the sequence is, choose a simple story, structure it mentally or with notes using BME, then actively try to sprinkle in a few key phrases as you practice telling it. How do the sources recommend actually doing the practice itself? What methods do they suggest to get comfortable?
Well, the sources suggest various accessible ways to practice this. You could write the story down first, consciously using the structure, phrases, and thinking about details and tenses. Writing helps solidify the structure in your mind and lets you choose your words carefully without pressure.
Okay, writing it out first can help organize thoughts.
Definitely. Then you can practice telling it out loud, just to yourself initially.
Telling it out loud seems huge. Just hearing yourself say the words, getting the feel of it.
It is huge. As the sources imply, hearing yourself helps you feel the flow or where it feels clunky or unnatural. It helps you notice if you're jumping around or if your tense usage is inconsistent. It highlights where you need more work on structure or phrasing or even breath control.
Oh yeah, you can immediately spot awkward transitions or confusing parts when you say it aloud. Things that looked fine on paper might sound weird.
Absolutely. Another great suggestion from the sources is to record yourself on your phone and listen back. This can be really revealing, even if it feels a bit awkward at first.
Cringy sometimes.
Maybe a little. But it helps you hear exactly how your story sounds to a listener, how clear the structure is, how natural the phrases sound, whether the details are overwhelming, how your pacing is. It gives you that objective perspective.
That makes sense. And what about practicing with others?
And of course, the best case scenario, if possible, is to share it with a language partner, or even just a patient friend who knows you're practicing English storytelling. Getting feedback, even just simple reactions like, that was clear, or I got a bit lost there, is incredibly valuable for refinement, real-world practice.
The key across all these methods seems to be active practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just reading about structure and phrases isn't enough. You have to actually try it.
Not at all. You need to actively do it. You need to tell stories. This builds muscle memory not just in your mouth, but in your brain for organizing your thoughts quickly, accessing the right vocabulary and structures, and using those connecting phrases naturally. Each story you tell, each time you practice applying the structure and adding those layers, is a chance to refine the skill. It genuinely gets easier, more natural, and more comfortable the more you intentionally do it. You build confidence with each attempt.
Practice is everything. The more you intentionally use this simple structure, incorporate the phrases, experiment with balanced details and emotions, focus on consistent tenses, the more natural, clear, and confident you'll become when sharing your experiences in English. It's like any skill.
Exactly. Start small, focus intently on getting the structure right. First, that's the foundation. Then layer in the language tools like the phrases and expressive vocabulary. Gradually refine the color, the energy, the nonverbals, and the timeline clarity. It's a process, but one that's entirely achievable with consistent practice, as the sources strongly suggest.
This has been a really comprehensive deep dive into a skill that is so absolutely fundamental for everyday English communication. We've taken those key insights straight from the source material and hopefully laid out a clear practical guide for you, the listener, to follow.
Yeah, we've really driven home the need for that simple, clear three-part structure, beginning, middle, end, as the non-negotiable foundation for preventing confusion and providing essential clarity in your narrative. Get that skeleton right first.
We've shown how those specific storytelling phrases, the signposts, can turn a basic retelling into something much more dynamic and engaging, acting like verbal guides that smoothly direct the listener through your narrative journey. Makes it flow better.
And we've explored that critical art of adding color and feeling with well-chosen, impactful details and emotions, remembering that crucial balance the sources warned about. Captivate with vividness and genuine feeling, but never overwhelm with unnecessary clutter. Be selective.
And we address that timeline challenge, showing how consistent tense usage, past continuous for background, past simple for the main sequence, past perfect for earlier events, supports your structure and makes the order of events crystal clear, avoiding that temporal confusion.
And finally, we added that layer of cultural context, understanding that in English-speaking context, casual storytelling is common practice, often aims for entertainment, might involve humor and slight exaggeration for effect, and relies heavily on nonverbal communication to enhance the connection.
Focusing on these specific elements, all drawn directly from the source material's perspective on effective communication, gives you a powerful, actionable toolkit. It helps you overcome those common issues like disjointed ideas, detail overload, or timeline confusion, and empowers you to feel much more comfortable and effective sharing your personal experiences in English, moving from hesitant to empowered.
And just to leave you with a final provocative thought, building on that fascinating cultural piece we discussed, We touched on American and British approaches mentioned in the sources. Now, maybe take a moment to reflect on this. How does storytelling typically work in your native language or culture? What are the norms there?
That's a really interesting comparison, isn't it? Are there differences in the expected structure? Is a strict BME always expected? Is there more or less emphasis on emotion, humor, or exaggeration compared to what we discussed about English storytelling? How are details typically handled? More, fewer, different kinds?
Thinking about those contrasts can give you really deep insights into the nuances of English storytelling styles and communication norms. It helps you consciously adapt your approach, understanding why you might need to adjust certain habits. What stands out to you when you compare them? What feels different?
Yeah, that cross-cultural comparison really adds another layer to understanding why these specific English techniques are highlighted as effective for connection and engagement in this context. It's not necessarily universal.
Exactly. And remember, as the sources encourage, keep talking, keep practicing these techniques deliberately, and try to enjoy the process of learning and sharing your stories in English. Every story is an opportunity to connect, to practice, and to get better.
For sure. It's a journey, not a destination. Until next time.